You know, one of the things we have to have in our car is it has to run good, but the air conditioning has to work as well. When you have air conditioning problems, there can be lots of different problems that cause it not to work. One is a bad condenser. Now that's what we're going to show you today. We've got a condenser that's leaking. Now when we do the dye process and you're looking for the leak, you can't see it with your regular eyes. You have to use special glasses and special light. It's a special light that when you put these glasses on makes it stand out. So I'm going to put the glasses in front of the camera so that you can see the leak. Now of course the condenser is right here behind the grill in front of the radiator, and our leak is right down here at the bottom. Now with the regular light you can't see it, so we're going to have to bring in our dye light. And the dye light looks blue until you put these glasses over it, and then it makes the dye leak show up. So that's why we've got to replace this. Now anytime you got a fault like this, you really need to look it over visually to make sure you can see why it happened. Sometimes they're natural, sometimes maybe down there a condenser, a little rock could come up there and hit it. Sometimes it could be due to high pressure on your system. So like when we had it here with our gauges, we made sure all the pressures were not too high and it didn't blow it out. Now we're working on an 01 Toyota Solara, and the condenser is out in front of the radiator, of course. So when you look at it here, the radiator's back here. When you look at the service manual, it says you need to remove the radiator. Well, we've got a little shortcut that'll help you from having to do that. We've already evacuated it. Now we're ready for the repair. Now you can see the radiator right here, but the condenser is actually buried underneath this frame piece up here. So what we have to do is be able to push the radiator back, but our fans are in the way. So the first thing we want to do is actually loosen the fans. There's actually two separate fans here. They both have two number 10 bolts at the top. Now this one has a couple connectors that we have to unhook as well. And then there's one down a little bit lower. Now at this point, this fan should just be able to pull up and out of the way. There's actually another connector on the bottom, so when you pull this up and out of the way, just lay it down on top of the engine. There's one wire that'll stay there. Just lay it up out of the way. What we're trying to do here is make room to push that radiator back. Now the next one, let's take the radiator hose loose. We just need to, now you're going to lose some antifreeze, so put a pan down here to catch it. We just need to pop that loose, pull the hose off, and lift it up and over to keep it out of the way. And then there's two bolts on the top of this fan as well. These are number 10 bolts. Now if you notice the other fan, all it had was two bolts at the top. This one has two bolts at the top and one at the bottom. I can't get my camera down there to show that to you. Now if you'll just stick your hand down there, you can actually feel the bolt and you can get a number 10 wrench on it. But then when we pull this up, we'll actually show you where it's at. We've got a connector on this one as well. Now if you look at the bottom of this when we raise it, you can see that's where the bolt at the bottom goes in. So you loosen the top two and you can't get it up because that bolt's holding it. Reach down there and take that other bolt down, and you can just lay this one up out of the way as well. Now we've got a couple little arms here on the radiator we need to take loose. We take those, they just simply lift off of studs. They have rubber bushings in them. Now the radiator is basically loose, but we want to pick it up and slide it back. It's got feet in it that keep it in place. So we don't have to actually drain everything, we just want to pick it up and slide it back. Now if you look down in there, you can see we've got enough room now to get the condenser, which is back in there, out. Now to get the condenser out, there's two number 10 bolts. One is right there. And one is on the other side. Now the condenser, you see, actually you can push back. It can't go back all the way yet because we're still connected. Now the connection on this side is actually probably a little easier if you go from underneath, reaching up underneath it. Now there's one bolt that holds the manifold block to the condenser, and there'll be an O-ring in there, but you just need to break it loose, separate it from the condenser. And there's the manifold block, and you can see the O-ring. We'll need to replace that O-ring. Now this one here you can see is going to be pretty tight. You're going to need a couple of wrenches. It's a 19 and a 17. One is a swivel and the other one is the fitting. Put some lubricant on there to try and get it to break loose. But that fitting is embedded into the soft core of the condenser, and as you go to pry on this, you're undoubtedly going to break that core. Now once you get it broke loose, don't just try and go all the way untightening it. Go back and forth until you gradually get it to spin. Once you get that swivel turn, you should be able to pop that fitting off. Now this is that fitting on the old condenser that we had a hard time getting loose because the swivel was so tight. You need to look at that real close. And if you look at the threads, they're pretty flattened out. That means it's probably going to leak. And when you turn this over, you can see the fact that we had to put some force on that, it actually flattened that out. It's not perfectly round anymore. So it is not going to go on the new one because this is not round where the new one is. So basically we need to replace this piping as well. This is where it goes on to the dryer. It's got your high side fitting. We need to order one of these out. Otherwise we're going to leak there and have to do this job over again, which we don't want to do. Now the dryer is actually hooked to the condenser too, and you need to get it first. It's held on to bracket. If you have a real long Phillips screwdriver, you can actually just come in through here and take those two nuts out that are holding the dryer to the condenser. If you look right here in the middle, there's a little keeper on that bar that comes across that pipe. And on this side, if you'll squeeze those two plastic tabs together, you can push it out. It comes out the other side. They just go through the fins to keep it in place. Now we've got everything loose. That condenser should just come straight up and out. And there we go. Now anytime you do a job, no matter how long it takes, you only want to do it once. You don't want to come back. So anytime you take a part out like this, there's some things you need to examine. Now when you take the condenser out, you need to drain some of the fluid out, drain it out in your hand, and look for any kind of metal shavings or particles that are in there. If they're in this one, they came from the AC system, so you're going to have to then flush the whole AC system. If you don't, you're going to end up destroying this one as well. The next thing you want to look at is physically look at it all over, any place where it may be rubbing. There's mounts and brackets, and if you see some shiny spots where it's been rubbing, you want to fix that before you put the new one in, because if that's the case, it's just going to rub through on the new one. Now in this case, ours was leaking right down here. Now if you remember looking at the dye light, this was covered with dye. I don't see any signs where it's actually been rubbing or scraping or puncture or anything like that. So I think we're safe just to put in the new condenser. Now I always order my parts before I start the job because I want to be able to move through this smoothly. When I get the part and open it up, what you want to do is look it all over, make sure it's identical, same part. But the other thing that'll help you with is looking how it is made. It'll help you understand how to take it apart. When I look at this, I can see that there's rubber feet on both sides. There's a manifold block, connects right there and connects right here. And I've got the two number 10 bolts that hold it to the frame. So just like a radiator core support, this is a condenser core support. It sits down in the feet, and these bolts right here are the only thing that hold it on. So it gives you a better idea when you have to disassemble, knowing what you've got to do. So we're going to unpackage this, and it's time to install it. We're right at the very beginning of our air conditioning season. This system worked last season, but they went to use it this time and it wasn't working. They brought it to us. When we put our gauges on it, it still had pressure, but not enough. Now if you actually have the system come in and there's no pressure, it's exhausted all of its pressure in there, that means it's actually probably got a large enough hole that it's open to the atmosphere. If that were the case, you're definitely going to have to flush the system and change your dryer as well, because that atmosphere can get in there and be contaminating to the interior of the system. Now that leads us to this thing. When you get this new condenser, it does not want to have atmospheric pressure in it. So when you take your new condenser out of the box, it should be sealed. Now when you take this off, there's a plug in there. They pressurize this because when it comes to you, it should be sealed with no atmospheric pressure inside. If you take this off and there's no release, in other words, it's lost its seal, that means atmospheric pressure can get in here and it possibly could have contaminated the inside. Get another one before you put this in, otherwise you could be doing this job a second time. Now this manifold block had an O-ring on it. We have to replace it. Now we've got two O-rings to replace. Make sure you get the type that are approved for air conditioning, HNBR. Now get a can of PAG oil and actually pour a little bit into the lid. And then take your O-rings and dip them into the PAG oil. That way your O-rings are coated in PAG oil before you insert them. Then simply take them out and put them in place. Now you don't want to put your O-rings on dry. There's too good a chance they'll get skinned up and they won't seal well when they actually go into the housing where they need to seal. So coat them with PAG oil before you put them in. Now we got the condenser core supports that are little rubber pads that need to go down, and they'll actually insert in there. So make sure that they go down there and they're seated well when you stab the condenser in place. We've got the condenser in place, we've got it pushed forward, and now we've got the studs through. Just put the nuts on, but don't tighten it down yet because we want a little bit of flex before we put our pipe in. Same thing on the other side. Now we have to get the pipe threaded on, so you definitely want to have room for the condenser to wiggle. Makes it easier to get the pipe threaded. The new pipe doesn't come with this little bracket, so we got to take it off the old one. And that's the one that just slides through to keep it in the center of the radiator. On this side of the new tube you see the O-ring and the swivel comes down, but the long shaft of that needs to actually set down inside the condenser fitting. Now here's why it's important to have a little wiggle room. Once you put that pipe, get it inserted down in the fitting, now we got the swivel to go down, and that's where you sometimes have to wiggle it just to get it to start. At this point, don't force the threads or you'll damage the new ones. But if you wiggle it around, you should be able to get it just to start. Once you get it started, it should thread down easily. Don't tighten it yet till we get the other end started. Now on the other end, the pipe has the manifold block that goes into the condenser. We need to insert that in there. If you get the manifold block in place, it's got a little bolt with the number 10 on it. You just get it started. Now at this point, since the other one is in place and threaded, you can go ahead and tighten this one down. After you got the manifold block tight, it's time to put the dryer back on. If you remember, that was held on with two brackets, or a bracket with two bolts. Now the other end of this pipe goes into the dryer. The same thing, you want to get that inserted and the bolt started and threaded before you tighten anything down. Once you get the pipe in place, it's threading easily, go ahead and tighten it down. Now at this point everything is hooked up. It's time to go back and tighten things down. Now you can put that little centering device in. Just goes around the pipe and pushes through the condenser. Now this is the new condenser and we're having to use two different tools. The top swivel is still a 19, but the bottom was a 17, but if you notice it's much larger. We're going to have to use a crescent wrench to actually get held onto this. But they've actually reinforced it then on the updated condenser. Now there's the old condenser with our crescent wrench around it for the new one, so you can see how much larger they've made that just to make it a lot more sturdy. Thread it by hand as far as you can and then you use your tools. It's very important here to keep what our crescent wrench is on, the block, keep that as solid and as steady as you can so that you're not going to twist it, because that block goes into the soft core of the condenser. If you twist it or tweak it too much, you'll end up having a leak right there. Our dryer has a connector. It's time to connect it. Everything should be tight. Now we can tighten down the little number 10 bolts that keep everything in place. Tighten the one on the other side. Now we've got the condenser in, so in reverse order we'll just need to bring the radiator forward. Make sure the feet are anchored down in the holes. Then we got brackets on top. Next thing then is to put the fans back in. Remember there's two, so slide one in, then the other in, and the radiator hose, hook them all up, and we'll be ready to charge the system. The condenser's all been changed. We've evacuated and recharged the system and checked it. It's working well. It's cooling very well. Now the last thing we need to do is to assure our work. And they make these little things called tamper guards, and we're going to install them. Now these tamper guards are actually pretty easy to install. They're just a sleeve and it goes around each of the fittings. You slide it down over the top, seat it all the way down, and then you just take a heat gun and shrink it around it. Apply the heat. As you can see, it just shrinks it around. Now what that does is seal that, so if anybody's going to tamper with this system, they're going to have to tear those off. So if this car should come back and those things are missing or they've been disturbed, you know someone else has been tampering with it.